Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FPS Sample webinar. So my name is Peter. I'm a lead programmer on the FPS Sample that we will be talking about today. And I'm here with Andy and Thomas, and maybe you can say a few words about who you are.
Yeah, so hi, everyone. I'm Thomas, with marketing, helping out, taking questions during the session. So feel free to write any questions you may have during the chat. We'll try to catch up on them in the end of the presentation. So looking forward to the presentation to start.
And I'm Andy. I'm an evangelist based here in Unity Copenhagen, and I work closely with all kinds of different teams here to learn what they're building at Unity and then show people how to use it. That's pretty much it.
Cool. So let's remove this slide that's now actually wrong because we have started. It's not starting soon. We have, as you can see, a Q&A slide towards the end. And there's also a few links there. So I will mention a few links, but they are on that slide as well. So we'll share that towards the end. But we're here today to talk about our FPS Sample project, which we launched this fall at our Unite conference. And I'll just, maybe some of you know already about it, but I just wanted to show you, this is our landing page, unity.com/FPS Sample. And this is a great place to start to figure out what is this project about. There's a bunch of high-level information points and also some very brief snippet videos. And then there's a few actually real full-length talks that we gave at Unite, one about graphics and one about the netcode. So definitely you can pick up some more information here. I just wanted to start with also maybe a few latecomers can join while we watch this very brief video about the FPS sample. This is some in-game footage, and you will quickly be able to recognize this was actually Andy that was killed right there.
Right.
And this is footage from the game as it looks today. It's a first-person shooter, as you can see. It's multiplayer only. It has this map that is probably for maybe 8-10 player. And it has another test map that we're going to show in a little while. It has a couple of characters, some weapons that shoot in different ways, and all the code and all the assets that you're seeing here is part of the project and something that you can go and check out. And that is actually what we will be talking about initially. How do we get hold of this project? As you can find on this landing page, there's a link to our GitHub repository. Just going to zoom in a little bit. And this is where we release versions of the FPS sample. This is where you can get the project on your own machine and start building it. And we're going to go through the steps of doing that today, although we will cheat a little bit and we cut out the waiting time for importing and so on. But first of all, on this page, there's a README information that will show you very important information about which version of Unity is currently the one that you need for this project. So right now, it's one of the very latest, if not the latest, beta of the 18.3 cycle. And as we upgrade this project, this will be updated. So you need Unity 18.3 beta 12, and you need Windows right now. That's the only platform the client is running on. If you are planning to host a server, it could be either on a Windows machine or on a Linux box. And in order to get the project, you need to clone it from GitHub. If you don't know what that means, there's plenty of resources online that will explain that to you. But one thing that is super, super important is that you enable Git large file support in your Git client before you try to clone it. If you don't do that, you won't get all the textures, you won't get all the assets. It will be a pretty miserable experience. Also, almost as a trick, there's this in this green button in GitHub, for those of you who know, there's like a download zip. This will not work. You will get a zip file. It will contain everything, but not the textures and nothing of the juicy stuff, only the code, and it will be it won't work. So make sure you actually clone the project. And I conveniently did that before we started here. So here in this very dark console here, I have cloned in the folder Git FPS sample. I've cloned the project, and let me show it maybe in a little bit nicer way here. So like this, FPS sample here. So this is what you get when you clone it from GitHub, and you can notice right away there's an assets folder. That means it's probably something you can open with Unity. And sure enough, if you open this project, it will look a little bit like this. after a wait. We will not sit through that, but it'll take a little while to import all this. It's a decent sized project of about 18 gigabytes or so. So the most important thing when you start this is to notice this little menu where we keep a few of our tools for the project. And maybe the most important one is found in the Windows section called Project Tools. And you should definitely just dock it right away and keep it open, because you're going to use that a lot when working with this project. Let's start by looking at the top section here where we have the different levels that are in the project. There's a bunch of them: level menu, level 0 down here, and level 1 here, and there's a few other test levels and a bootstrapper. And the first thing you should do when you open the project is to try and click on the open button next to level 0, because that's a small test level. And if you see something, there's hope. Even though it's just like a blue thing, there's a really good chance you will have a camera that sits and watches and shows nothing. So let's just go and find something interesting, like in the gameplay here, we have some spawn points. Let's find one of this, hit F, and you will now be sort of like in the middle of this little level. If it looks something like this, you are in a good shape. It will run maybe a little bit bumpy in the beginning until it gets to compile all the shaders. But this is a good place to start. We can just hit the play in the editor to feel a little bit like we're talking about games. And you should, after a little while, enter what we call preview mode, because the FPS sample is multiplayer only. There's no single player campaign. There's no story or anything like that. It's only for killing your friends and having fun doing that. But in order to work with it, we have this mode where you can just run around all by yourself and test if you can make the jumps and so on, which is very useful if you're doing level design and so on. So this is a preview mode. No one can join you right now, but you can run around and check out things. Okay. Once you've done this, you most likely want to actually see that this is a multiplayer game and see how that works. And as some of you may know, if you are doing multiplayer development with Unity, it can be a little bit of a tricky thing, because you can't have two versions of Unity open in the same project folder. Yet you want multiple instances of this to connect to each other and play together. Maybe one of them is a server, another one is a client, and so on. So the solution we chose for FPS Sample was to use asset bundles, which is actually a pretty old feature in Unity, but it's not necessarily the most well-known thing. It's used often for distributing things, but we also use it to speed up the iteration time. So we have all the assets, the levels and the players and the weapons in asset bundles. So I, as a programmer, will only have to build them maybe once a day, and then I can iterate quickly, make changes to my code, do a standalone build, and once I have a standalone build, I can then fire up a couple of instances and connect them to each other.
So I have a question, Peter. So I noticed that you have levels and assets. So what goes into levels, or when should you build one or the other?
Yes, it's a good question. The first time you open this, let's assume you just download this from GitHub, you definitely need to use the all button, because that would compile or build the asset bundles that has the levels in them, and it will also those that has assets in them. Assets is like a catch-all for stuff like players, weapons, and all projectiles, all manner of other things. So that's basically everything else. This is what you need to do the first time. Later on, if you know that you've only made changes to some levels, you may only need to build the levels. And if you are even more advanced, you can actually go into here and build only the asset bundle that contains a single level. So you can save some time doing that. But initially, definitely go for all the asset bundles. It will take a little while. It will take quite a while, actually a long while, the first time, because you have to compile shaders. But the next time, it's much, much faster.
I've noticed when tweaking and changing things, like making characters slightly bigger or changing the color of something, that after it's done the first time, it's significantly quicker.
Yeah.
Doing the updates every time. Yeah.
Don't lose hope by the time it takes. The first time, it will get much faster. And importantly, it is not enough to build the asset bundles. You also need to build the game. And the game is basically the standalone player. And once you build these two things, you basically unlock this very nice tool down here that is our quick start area. And this is now, it feels like a little bit like multiplayer, because now you can select, I would like to play multiplayer, I would like to play level 0, I would like to have 2 clients and a headless server, and I'm not going to use the editor. And then you can basically say go with the start button, and it will hopefully spin up these processes. It's a bit tight on this screen here. I hope you can see that we have actually 2 clients here with green. And then we have this guy over here. It's a headless server. You can write a few commands, say, oh, there's actually two no names on this. And we can run around here and, maybe we can find the other guy and see if we can shoot him. It's a small level. I use it for this little testing here. And we can just run down here to the lost and found zone, basically. Let's meet up down here. So there's no name. And we can get a look at this one of the characters. And this is another of the characters. There's 2 characters in the game. It's the robot and the terraformer, we call this guy. And we could shoot each other. Of course, we need to do that. I had to do that.
What kind of differences do you have between the terraformer and the robot?
Yes. So now I actually quit the robot, so he's going to die in a little while. But so I'm the terraformer here, and I actually have each character only has 1 weapon, but it has 2 firing methods. So I have like a sort of a instant hit, like a hit scan weapon, we call them. So it actually is just a ray cast, but it has a spread on it. So if I fire for a little while, you can see it will actually become less precise, go out and be more precise. So you have to actually fire in small bursts. And then my right click will launch a rocket. And let's see if I can maybe switch to another character. Oh, I can't do that because the game has started. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to show you the robot by just starting up another one with only 1 here. So the robot character has also just 1 weapon, but he has like a machine gun and a rotating barrel kind of gun that will slowly accelerate, so it shoots faster and faster. So like this. And the secondary fire is a bounty grenade that does like this, and after a little while it will explode. So you can actually use it to sort of like attack people around the corners and so on if you want to do that. It's very nice. And spread some damage in here. So we actually didn't choose these weapons just because we found them fun, but because they actually have different networking properties. You have to do different things if it's a hit scan weapon or if it's like a physics-driven weapon like the bouncing grenade and so on. So that's the reason why we chose these very classical weapons. Okay, so basically this is it. Now you're all set to start working on the FPS sample, and you can you could actually also just stop working and start playing if you wanted. You could launch this standalone server, and you could have join it from maybe spin it up on a server on your local area network and have your friends join and so on. I wanted to highlight just a few more things and coming back to some of these things. So when we say levels, in the context of a sample game, we try to be consistent and say levels when it's like a level I'm playing. I don't know, I'm playing on this level. Not the same as Unity scenes. So you can see this level is actually made up of 2 Unity scenes. And I think level 1 is made up of 3 or 4 or something.
3. I think one of them is the main sort of environment. Another one is a background, like the backdrop, and split up in that way, as some people do with multiple scenes in Unity.
Yeah. So we are a pretty small team, but even we found it pretty useful to split it up into multiple scenes so we could work in some isolation from each other. And that's why we use the term level to that. And we have this little tool that if you click on this, it will open the right set of levels, scenes that you need. Then I wanted, okay, so that's basically what you need to get started. And one of the things I wanted to dig a little deeper into is, because I think it's important in order to understand how this game may be different from many Unity projects. Because we're spending so much time in the standalone player, because it's a multiplayer game, we had to actually tool a little bit more around that. And one of the things is that if we if we go and just hit run here after we build the game, we basically just start the standalone player in what we call the boot mode. So there's actually no game running now. It is not even a client or server. It hasn't been decided yet if it should be a client or server.
And this uses the bootstrapper scene?
It does.
Yes. I always find it's amazing when you look at the build settings and it's just that bootstrapper scene. Yes.
I think we should go and show that actually. That's a pretty good point. So if you look at the build settings, just to prove that all our levels actually are in asset bundles, we only have this one scene bootstrapper, and then we have an empty scene, which is actually empty. That's a little hack, but this is the important one. This is the scene that is part of the standalone build. Everything else that needs to be loaded is in the asset bundles. And this is what we have right now. We have only the bootstrapper when we are here in boot mode. There's nothing, no game running. We have this in-game console that we can use to type a few commands and so on. And one of the things we could do was we could say, okay, I'm going to be a client. Say, I'm the client. So now it actually initializes a network, and it will sort of like, now it cannot be a server though. You have to, it's a path. You basically have to choose, do you want to be a client or do you want to be a server? And one thing you then can do is you can load maybe the menu. If you want to do that, it's actually a scene in itself that will load in. And now it will look, what we just did here was actually exactly the same thing that if we make a final build, a real build of the game, and double click on the executable, this is what will happen. It will issue the client and the load level menu, and we are now here where we could maybe join a game if we wanted to do that, and so on and so forth. And if I wanted to, I could actually go and say boot, and now it will go back and be like an empty shell again. And I could maybe say, no, I actually want to be a server. I could serve level 00. And now I've become a server. Now I'm a server. I could connect to it with a client. And I'm listening on this IP address and this port number. And I'm actually just, I can use the keys to like toggle between these cameras and observe if anyone is running around the server.
And what's quite fun is when you use the quick start tool in the corner, and it's not headless, it'll actually pop up that server as a little floating camera. So I remember at one point it was a black screen, and it's a bit more interesting with having a...
Yes, and it can be used for debugging purposes, just to be able to inspect and see what is actually going on here. And I wanted to show you this thing about the console, because that is how it's actually built, this little quick start down here. And I think it's a technique that can be used actually maybe in other types of games as well. Because if you notice down here, we are starting the standalone processes with some command line arguments. So this is just arguments passed to the executable, but they are prefixed with a plus sign. Anything you prefix with a plus will be executed as a command on the console. So if I run this thing, just run it, I get a black thing. But if I wanted to run it with client and load level menu, I run it now. It will actually execute these commands as soon as it boots, and it will load the menu like this. And this is the tooling we're using to basically build the quick launcher, so we can spin up the game in different configurations, and it speeds up the development tremendously when you're working with multiplayer. So I would recommend something like this for anyone who is doing multiplayer development with Unity.
I have another question. Yep. So in building this tool and the arguments in the window, did a lot of this come from when you were meeting a lot of studios making multiplayer games, or your own past experience?
I think it's probably a little bit of a combination that, so I used to work on some engines that definitely had this type of in-game sort of like debugging things. Then I moved to develop on Unity, and I kind of didn't think so much about it because I had the editor. So I could do any debugging tool I wanted. I just did my own little, custom windows and tools that like a lot of people done. And then I started, because when I started to use Unity, it was not for multiplayer game. And then I started to do multiplayer games, and suddenly I really needed the console and stuff like that again, because I was spending all my time in the standalone player. Yes. So we basically felt the need again because we were spending so much time in the standalone player. And I can maybe show a little bit of about how to how that works in a little while. I wanted to show just one. So we have this server or client that's very useful, but you can actually also, and that's useful for benchmarking and so on. If you have like a standalone build, you can also actually issue the preview mode, the one that we saw in the editor. And maybe I should just try and use the big level here. And that is very useful if you just want to maybe do some benchmarking or something, run around in like a real heavy scene and see how things is performing. This is the real level. You can see there's a little bit of a laptop here, and you can sort of like play around in a single player-ish kind of fashion here. Okay, good. So what we do here when we build stuff here is we build something. If you click on the open build folder, you can see in our project here in the FPS Sample, we actually have a subfolder called auto build, and this is where all this is where the standalone build is placed, where the asset bundle is placed as well, and this is where we run things from. But if we are going to build a real standalone build to give to a friend or something, we have what we call the build system up here, which is just a bunch of C# scripts that you can execute by selecting these. And this is what our build machines are doing. So we have build machines that are building these things, and it will actually produce a build that is not called auto build, but it's called FPS Sample. And we can actually go and check out one of them. You can just go and see here. And this is how it looks. It has like FPS Sample. It has actually a couple of config files as well. If you just open this one, game.cfg, you can see it actually is a text file that has the client load level menu commands that we saw before. And if I remove this and clicked on this, it would just start up in black screen, and I could like mess around with it as I usually do. So the reason why I mentioned all of this is if you're going to take a look at the FPS Sample, there's a lot of this invisible stuff that if you don't know it, I think many things will be tricky to do. But if you know of this, it'll be much easier to debug things or try out. So how does it work if I'm like connecting 2 or 5 clients and so on? You can actually do that in a reasonably easy way. And by starting to see how we use these different commands and tweakable things, I guess you will also start to maybe use in your own code. If you're building new, features and so on, you could use those in your projects.
Do you also want to show the other window, which is the extension of this quick start window where you can add extra arguments?
Yes, possibly. I actually definitely want to do that. Let's see if I have it open. I don't. So, okay. So once you grow out of this, we have something for you. It's called the launch window, and I'm just gonna put it up here as well. Okay. So frequently, when you're like debugging stuff or something, you actually want to maybe have to try and reproduce a situation. So maybe it's to reproduce a situation we have like 2 clients have been connected and a third one joins and so on and so forth. And it's actually quite useful to have a whole list of preset sort of ways you can start the game. And then you can, so in this case, I have like a headless server, a headless client. These are names I just kind of like come up with myself. I could say this used for other things as well. This should be maybe called a client with net stats enabled. And then I could say, okay, I would like to try, I can enable these switch out here and say, I would like to start a headless server and a client with net stats enabled. And there should be one of each. And then when I hit the green button, it will basically just execute all the green ones here. So let's see what happens. I get a server, I get a client, and let's see. Sure enough, I have all the net stats enabled. All these interesting graphs and so on shows how the network is basically performing right now. And one of the very cool things you can do that is actually not documented anywhere, so unless you actually read the code, you might not know. We have something called a headless client. So a headless client is basically that if you're on a machine that is not infinitely powerful, which most of us are, you will sometimes want to run many clients, but maybe it'll be graphically prohibitive to do that. So you can run up, start up a client with a batch mode, no graphics, and this is secret one, force client systems. And then you can say connect to localhost and enter debug move 2. So let's just try and do maybe just 2 of these and a headless server. Okay. So if we do these 3 things, we get something that is, from a performance point of view, actually pretty lightweight. These are just console, applications. There's no graphics here. One of them is a server. We can see this one up here. It's headless server. We can say list, and it has 2 players. And let's just so let's join and see what's going on. We'll start this one client with netstats enabled. Like this. And then now we join the server running locally, and we'll see how things look on the server. So, I had all this graphics on. Just turn that off. Okay. So if wow, there's actually someone here. Okay. So this is one of the headless clients behaving quite the part as a headless build.
This is a bot that's testing out.
It's kind of bot, but it's important that it's actually connecting as a client and it's speaking the network protocol. So it's more like a dude hammering randomly on the keyboard.
So it's like a pre-programmed run around in a circle shoot.
Exactly. And that's actually the sort of like the argument I gave up here, debug move. There's a 0, which means just stand there and do nothing. There's a 1, run around in circles. There's a 2, run around in circles and shoot from time to time.
So I guess what's interesting here is you can not only have these commands to run in either preview loop or boot mode and things like this, but in this case, you've created this command debug move with different states, you call it, or different informational parameters to almost test something. So I guess people could also add their own things like
absolutely
simulate this or change lighting red. I don't know, like it's extensible in that way.
Very much so. I think actually, if you were to, you can for example go like this and you can say health, then you can see the commands that are here. Some of them are very sort of connect. Sure, there must be a connect. But there are also some maybe more, weird ones.
Become a spectator.
Become a spectator or max Q. What on earth does it even mean? And apart from the commands, we have stuff, what we call the variables. I can say vars, and you see even more stuff here. Some of them, server, port. Yes, surely I would need that. Some of them are replicated entity, show client info. Maybe even only centrical to the programmer who wrote it, but it's quite useful to be able to leave debug code in the code and be able to enable it. Because in a multiplayer game, I can guarantee you that all the problems will happen on your friends' machines while you're playing, and they will call you over, and then you would really wish you had debugging tools available. Just pull down the consoles and turn on debugging stuff for your code, right?
And also at the top there, you can see, R, which I assume for renderer, then SSIO, SSR, sometimes scattering. So you can turn those on and off and see what the...
Actually, so I found that I've grown to like this way of prototyping stuff by first creating the features like just console commands, and then if I needed them, I would maybe create GUI on top of them to actually expose it. So for example, if we go into the options menu here, I have, let's just say the bloom effect here, right? I can toggle it here if I want, bloom effect on and off. I could also toggle it here and say 0, and when I press enter now, watch around the mouse, watch the bloom effect thing, it will basically toggle the UI as well. So I wired up the UI to be also the commands here, because often you have some things you want to expose to the users and some things you maybe do not want to expose to users. The only difference is that once you click these, not only does it set it, it also calls save config. It's another console command that actually writes out all the variables that has been flagged as user configs to a file, so that this is the way we sort of store, user preferences. And I think this system grows on you once you're starting using it, and you will find more and more uses of it.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when some debug UI, a lot of people invest so much time into it, when instead you could have a console and very quickly already have a method in your code doing something, and then just expose that as a command or something like this.
So maybe it's actually useful to just, if we say show that FPS maybe 2 like this, it shows a bunch of stuff up here. Let's see if I can move the camera a bit so it's clear. Okay, so it shows frames per second. Like this is like minimum, average, and maximum over like the last 100 frames or something like that. Okay, so basic tools like this. I think it could be useful to basically just see how was this done in code. So this little overlay up there, and we could go to code here and go to like yes, I think like this. Okay. So what we see here is two things. First of all, we see two lines that are what you need to do in order to create the variable show.fps as a default value 0, blah, blah, blah. And I just set it to 2, which meant that I suddenly got stuff on screen. And if I look at where this config var is used, I can see here that it is it has the like a tick update here. And if it's greater than 0, I will potentially draw some FPS stuff. And in this one, you have what we call the debug overlay. I can just write a bunch of stuff here. Say I would like on the position 0,1, this string formatted. And actually, this is not using strings. This is using character arrays behind the scenes, so it does not produce garbage to do this. So I think this is maybe one of the overlooked aspects of having a sample game like this. That it's also a place where you can basically go and just steal stuff.
Not just harvest assets or shaders or textures and things, which some people do, but also harvest useful tools and useful structure. For of your code and how.
Okay. So maybe we should talk a little bit about, since it's a multiplayer game, how the actual sort of network synchronization works. I'm just going to show one little debug feature that is maybe interesting if you wanted to see that. Okay, so let's start a single like this multiplayer game. So this is a thing that is only for debugging purposes, but it's just to show you the simplest possible synchronized object you can think of. I'm just going to run here so I have a nice view, and then I'm just gonna hop over to the server here, and I'm just gonna say spawn box 10. Okay, so I spawned 10 boxes on the server. And incidentally, I can actually also, on the client, because we have no security whatsoever built into this yet, you can say run at server, and then you can spawn box 5, right? And then you can actually execute commands on the server. Can be pretty useful. So this is the most primitive example of a replicated entity. It's a box being simulated on the server because we have an authoritative server model. So the server is doing all the decision making about update of position and rotation, and then it's being communicated to the client. And I just wanted to maybe bring up the code that is sort of responsible for doing that. So if we look here, okay. So what I just did was I issued this command spawn a bunch of boxes, and on the server we have this system that is running everything. It's just this little bit of code saying, oh, if there's stuff to spawn, spawn one of these in the game world. And if we look at this thing here, it's a pretty simple thing. You can see here it is nothing more than this. This is what it is, right? So it sits on a game object that also needs to have a rigid body because that's how it gets moved around. And then there's this little thing that maybe is a tell. When this thing is getting spawned, it actually verifies am I on the server or am I not on the server? This is a little bit of a hack. We usually do things in a different way by having prefabs that are like cooked to be either on the client or server, but this is debug code, so bear with us. So for clarity, you can see if you're on the server, well, if you're not on the server, then you are kinematic, meaning the no physics will actually move you around. You're basically just been driven by code. But if you are on the server, you get to stay as non-kinematic, so you get moved around by the physics system under the influences of gravity and so on. And then there is these two very important functions that you will see all over the code. We have a serialize and a deserialize. We do this very manually. You could maybe create some code generation or other fancy stuff, but we try in the sample to maybe think about what if someone wanted to integrate that into their system. Maybe they have opinions about they love code generation, or maybe they hate code generation. I don't know. Then it's easier to take this thing. You can also have a breakpoint here, and you can maybe understand it better while you're learning how things are wired up. So this is pretty straightforward. Serialize means that we are on the server and we are writing out these information things into a writer, which will end up being the stuff that we are sending to the client. And deserialize means that we are receiving the stuff on the client side. And in this case, we basically just, as soon as we receive this, we just transfer it into like the transform position and rotation. So this is at the simplest. This is how we're transferring positions, rotations, and all kinds of values from the server to the client. In reality, there are some more complications, because if you want this movement to be really smooth, you need to also create some interpolation code, so that even though the server is only sending out updates maybe 20 times a second, and you're rendering 60 times a second, you want to interpolate between that. Or if you're the player, the local player, it's somewhat more complicated, because you have client-side prediction. You want to be able to move around immediately when you hit W, not waiting for the server. But at the core of it, this is how the replication code sort of like looks like, or the serialization code looks like.
I do have, so related to this is a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
Says Warren, who's in the chat, and he said that, let me just have a look. He said, how would you expect a noob to dive into the networking trickery and look around? Like, what's the best entry point? What's the best place to go, especially if it's someone who may have not used asset bundles and may have not done networking before?
Yeah. I would say the best thing is probably to, before you start writing something new, find something that you would like to modify. I mean, find something that is already in the game that you would like to maybe tweak a bit, or add like a new like feature on or something. So maybe you want to just change the movement speed of the rockets, or the player movement speed, or whatever it is you would like to try around with. Start by tuning some of the stuff. And I think it's actually a really good question, because how do you get a hold of such a big piece of code like this? And I think I would like to highlight our forum. We try to look out there from time to time and sort of like answer questions. And there's also already some other folks that have checked out stuff. Sometimes the value of a breakpoint can be like, just give me a breakpoint where if I want to change this, that, where is it I should like look? So start by changing something, asking the forum if you need a hint for where would I change this, modify this, tweak this or something. I would say that's probably the best place to get started.
I guess another good place to get started is that a lot of the tools, a lot of the systems that you have for, say, characters and projectiles and particle explosions and things like this are prefabs or asset-based. So if you actually look in the, is it bundled resources folder?
Yeah, let's take a look.
I forgot the name.
Yeah, and it's also been changed pretty recently. So I think it's the, is it like a prefabs?
Yes, so inside this prefabs folder, we have each of the different variants of prefabs for the different states of, say, the terraformer, such as the first person, the hit collision, the ragdoll, and things like this. And as well as this, you may notice you have grenade and all these different projectiles and all these different sections. And probably a good recommendation is to kind of, like I call it, like go down the rabbit hole, like select the projectile, rocket, and then that would then have relevant scripts for how it moves and how it collides with something. And then that would then kind of eventually keep stepping all the way to what I want to change.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why you built the project in this way, so people can dissect it.
And maybe another point that's also relevant now, I kind of like leaked the fact that some of this has changed and is changing, that we do consider this a living project in the sense that we are continuously we are working on it sort of like on a daily basis, and we're rolling out updates to GitHub roughly once a month. That's what we try, and we will try to actually each update have both a bit of like under the hood cleanup stuff and also some some fun stuff, maybe a few more features and so on. And as it gets more features into the game, there will also be a better chance that you can find something that's a little bit like what you would like to do and then modify that, because that's always the best way to get started.
Yeah.
Yes. One thing that just strikes me is that I wonder if everyone is aware of the game modes that we have in this game. And I just want to quickly show that, because one thing is the individual objects, another thing is the sort of like the rules of the game. So we'll just start up the level here. It will enter our most sort of like developed game mode, which is called Assault. And you can see that you are like in the pre-match up here. And I'm just gonna on that server game Assault players, because it's gonna wait until so now it actually started. So really quickly, you are able to change the characters when you are in your sort of like base, and then there's like 3 bases, and my first task is to defend the base in this zone. You can see it from this dot here. So this round thing is actually when I'm inside that, I'll capture it back in case the other guys captured it. So it's a very simple assault mode thing where you have to capture a base if you're an attacker, or you have to defend the base if you're a defender. Once the attackers have captured all 3 bases, you'll have won the match. Or if the defenders manage to defend it until the timer has run out, the defenders will win this round. And I think that's maybe also another good place so if we look at the Gamemode System server, this is probably also a good place to start modding or hacking in this if you want, because this is where we have stuff like what's the respawn delay and which is the game mode to use, and you can find like the rules of the game here. So if you want to say, I'm going to make a game where whoever gets to this place the first will win, or something like that, this is the area where you would want to start hacking away. And maybe you could even search for Assault, game mode Assault, and say, okay, maybe I should actually derive from game mode and make game mode, I don't know, my game mode or whatever. And then you can start to create your variant of this and sort of like follow the pattern here.
I guess you could also combine them. So you could make a game mode like Push the Carts, which is in some games like Overwatch or Team Fortress 2
Yep.
or Payload or whatever it's may be called, and then combine some of these systems. So you could have a moving capture zone that moves along some kind of spline or dolly, and then...
I generally think that, there's no way around that if you have not done multiplayer games before, wrapping your head around all this thing about server, client, the prediction and rollback and all that stuff is tricky. So creating like a new game mode or something like this is probably a good way to start toying around with it, modifying existing properties, just, chip away at it. Don't go and say, oh, I have this crazy idea for a new thing that the world hasn't seen before. I'm going to code it from more or less scratch using this framework. I think that's risky.
I'd also, thankfully, Thomas put in the chat a link to Peter's talk, which gave at Unite LA, which does a fantastic intro to not just, I guess, FPS netcode, but netcode in general in packets and situations that could happen and things like this when beginning to dive into network code.
I think it's quite important to mention also that this way of doing shooter netcode is not something we invented. It's kind of like the way that you've been doing this for like 20 years or something almost. We just have now an implementation that's very much out in the open, and that hopefully more and more people will wrap their head around and be able to help each other out. And once more, a shout out for our forum. Go there and help each other and share what crazy stuff you're doing.
I've already seen someone reskin all the UI.
Yes, that's super cool.
And actually, I remember I think Unite LA, Stefan, the developer of TextMesh Pro, saw the project and said, I'm going to download this at home and port all the text because that looks like fun.
So that's so cool. So Andy asked me what did we change in the releases? Like what did we change in the last release we rolled out to
Because
GitHub?
you've done two
two, yeah.
now, or three, two.
And the reason why I want to have that question up is because it gives me a chance to highlight here on the GitHub page, we have a changelog. And this is how we try and summarize all the things that changed since the last time we did a release. So you can see a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm going to scroll quickly down and say, for example, made fixes block like this. Right? So we also share that stuff. But down here, you see some super cool stuff. So some fixes to the documentation and some typo fixes. And so there's a typo in the typo. Oh, okay, that's like very, okay. Anyways, and we have some fixed for headless build not running on some machines and so on. So these names here are actually GitHub names. So that's some of you guys or some of the people out there who made pull requests, and we're more than happy to take them in and have people contribute to the project. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think was super, super cool. So thanks if any of you are out there for doing that. I think that's amazing.
And in future releases, can you say like what might be added or might be changed in things?
So possibly? I would say we have a couple of things that are so near term. Okay, so I'm just going to be very honest and say that we say on our webpage that you can be playing 16-player multiplayer here, and if you try it, you will most likely crash if the first 14 people who are in there are very, very busy shooting each other. If there's a lot of activity, there's actually currently a crash in the code when you hit around 13, 14 players. So we definitely want to make some robustness fixes to the netcode and then add a little bit more gameplay features. I mean, pickups would be a nice thing. Everyone is talking about that, and it would be a very nice and pretty simple feature to have in there. But then it should be no secret that we would like to be able to host many more players. Right? That's a thing we would like to do. So we have some short-term things trying to work in more features, and we have some long-term things that would also require some more structural changes to the code.
A question from the users is, what about the new visual effects graph? Are you planning on implementing that, showing how you can build particles?
Actually, I would say not only planning. So you cannot see that on the GitHub version here, but on the version that we currently have in-house, I actually recently removed all the old particles, and we have someone from the Paris team, so someone who was actually developing the VFX graph. They are now creating some super cool effects for this game using the VFX graph. So we wanted to make sure that it was actually not just something that looked nice, but also something that was built in a good way. So that will most likely go out with a release a few weeks into the new year.
I guess that also helps not only the project is getting bug fixes and improvements, but also the developers like TextMesh Pro developer and also the VFX Graph team are then using the project to almost update things and test their things. I'm sure, yeah, VFX Graph looks super cool, but now you're going to have explosions and all sorts of things set up in this nice environment, which people can then download and dissect. And
Exactly. Super cool. Okay, so what else do we have? Are there any? I mean, yes, we are. Time is flying, and I definitely want to make sure that we get a chance to answer questions from folks.
I have one question, which was asked a little bit earlier from Tom Chen, and that's what type of notebook are you running?
The machine I'm running it on?
Yes.
You should have asked Andy. That would have been less embarrassing. This is a pretty beefy Alienware thing that has a 1080 graphics card. So I'm actually also able to run the big level. I think, I mean, there's no way around that in order to have a level perform decent in the editor, you need to have something that is more powerful than what is needed to run it in a standalone, right? Because you just run it like you have all the other gizmos and everything else is running here, right? So, but even that said, I definitely think we would definitely still think that it would be nice to do some more optimizations to the performance of the rendering.
And I guess you also have the benefit of having if people are on lower end hardware, I guess you also have this level 00 white box ish. It's not quite white box because there's What are you supposed to say?
Actually, I think this level here, I think this would run on most machines, right? It's a pretty small level, and you can definitely sort of you could run this on almost anything. I believe it is pretty lightweight and also pretty small and pretty intense if you try and play a deathmatch here with.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So that was cool.
Yes, since we released, we also picked up a few questions commonly asked, and one of the questions we keep getting is, can I use FPS Sample for my own commercial game, even if I'm just modding OBS?
Yeah. So we tried really carefully when we build this to make sure that all the content that goes into is something that we have the kind of license so that we can offer to pass on the license. So everything here is shipped under the it's kind of like Unity Creative something less license. We can see in the GitHub page, and I'm not a lawyer, but the gist of it is that it is something called Unity Companion License, and basically you can do anything you would like to do this, commercial or non-commercial or whatever. The only thing is that you have to use it in like a Unity setting. I mean, you have to use it as a Unity in a Unity project. But if you want to, build on top of this or just replace some of the stuff and you forget to replace a few texts and a few sound clips, that's no problem. It's fine.
And related to that, another question is, does the project come with everything we've seen today, or do I need to go and download some asset store packages for this to run?
No, it's kind of like a principle for us that we wanted to show that you can do something like a shooter game, which is kind of like a vanilla type of game with stock Unity. So we decided that we would not use anything from the asset store, even though some things, of course, could have been done maybe in a nicer way, but we wanted to show you can do it without. So there's no asset store packages there. And that also means that, for example, we have certain things that we have made like a little simple system of, I don't know, there's like a sound system in there that deals with that. You could probably find something in the asset store also. But if you wanted to maybe have all the source code yourself or whatever, you could also just build on top of what we have in here.
Another question is related to the netcode. The user wants to know whether we're using UNet or we're using parts of the new network layer.
So it's actually...
I noticed in the release notes that one update said removed all old UNet code.
So right now, so the way, if you look at the lowest level of netcode here, it is basically this class that has to implement IE network transport. That's just our abstraction for the what is needed by a transport layer. And what we use now is actually, it's called socket transport, which is a little bit unfortunate because this is using the new transport that is sort of like being shipped, like it's being in development right now, but we're already using it, the new package coming out. When we started, we used UNet, but we only used the what's called the UNet low-level layer, the low-level API or the transport layer. So it was pretty easy for us to actually move to the new transport layer. And some of the things we do in our code is stuff like we have our own way of sending reliable messages. We are only using from the transport layer kind of like UDPs, so unordered, unreliable. We have our own system to do reliable, but we're working closely with the people who do the transport layer. And once they have a reliability functionality in there, we probably replace our own with theirs. So we will over time be using it in a more and more deeply integrated fashion. But you can see it's a Unity networking transport. We basically sort of like that's what we're using for our transport right now.
So another question is, are we using ECS for the project? And what's this thing about pure versus hybrid mode? ECS, what does that even mean?
So we're using ECS actually we were using, interestingly enough, ECS as a like architectural choice even before ECS was a thing, because we started then, and then we migrated to use the actual Unity ECS, but we are using it, as you say, in hybrid mode. So that means that when you, for example, see stuff like, let's just take an example and show something like, let's just say, like a stem, maybe, oh, I can't spell. we have something called, okay, let's find it here. We have something in here. Gameplay. Just want to show you damage boxes like this. Okay. So in the inspector here, you have something called damage area. So this is an example of, it's a mono behavior. So you can see here, it looks like Unity code, but it has this game object entity script on it. And this is the way to basically tell ECS that I would like to treat this game object here as an entity in the ECS sense. And then we can use sort of like the ECS framework. If I look for when we are using this damage area, oops. So we have stuff here in the, so this is an ECS thing. It's a component system. It means it's a system from the ECS framework. Now we say ECS, but it's actually called unity.entity. So when we see unity.entity, it means that we're using ECS. And what we do here is that we have, when we create the manager or the system, we say, I would like to iterate over damage areas. And because I've done that, I can, in my onUpdate callback, I can get a component array and I can run through this. Now, this of course is not sort of like cache aware, laid out in memory, completely nice and so on, because we can't do that with mono behaviors. But this is the hybrid version of it. And we also have some things that are pure data components that are just basically structs. And in those cases, they can lay out in the memory very nicely. So we are very much in between because we need both existing old Unity features and the new things. And we will constantly be in this sort of like transition towards a more and more ECS only kind of way of doing things.
I think the next question is maybe more for you, Andy. It's, is this project also available for the lightweight render pipeline?
So the project is currently using the high definition render pipeline, which means that you can see lots of things like all the new shader settings and new lighting and various other things. There's volumetric fog in the caves, and you have a lot of amazing tools in there. The project currently isn't in the lightweight render pipeline, and that's partly because the project was built on top of HDRP in mind. I think it actually uses pretty much every feature in HDRP. Don't quote me on that, but from what I've seen, it uses pretty much a bit of everything. So like Martin, who's the art director, says, it's a good art safari of what can be done with subsurface scattering, volumetric fog, all these different things in one environment or one level. It's not in the lightweight render pipeline, partly because there are different platform reasons for that, but I guess I did a small test and it's public and online of the characters in lightweight, but rather than using the full HD lit shaders, they're almost like toon shaders, similar to Zelda Breath of the Wild style. There's a video of that on YouTube somewhere publicly. So yeah, and I guess I'm going to be experimenting more with that in the future. Maybe it's a case of taking some of the assets, because actually the level is very modular. I think it's the same 3 rocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
copied and pasted, like it's the same 3 boulders over and over again. So in terms of actually porting individual assets over to lightweight, it'll actually be quite easy and straightforward. But yeah, possibly more experimentation in the future. Yeah.
Great. So another question is, what does client-side prediction mean? And are you using raycasting to detect when you shoot someone? Then what happens if I have lag on my network? How does that work?
Okay, so time's almost up. I will say first, go watch the talk that I gave at Unite, because it will explain it better than what I can do now. Client-side prediction means that the client is allowed to start moving. So I can move my player character immediately when I hit forward and not have to wait for the server to basically say, okay, you can move. And when we have, for example, the girl's primary fire, which is a hit scan weapon, so it will shoot just with a raycast, what we do on the server is that we do not raycast against the current world. We actually raycast against a world that is slightly older. So against the world as it looked when the player who shot fired. So in that way, we get the sense that if I'm like have my crosshair on top of someone's head, I would actually hit them, even though I have maybe 100 milliseconds lag.
Great. So before we end, I think we should just do a call out to the chat and see if there's any questions you guys would like to ask. Then we do have time for one more.
And while you think about that, make sure you notice these different. I mean, these are the three like important sort of like websites. Unity.com/FPS Sample. If you don't remember anything else, you can find the rest from there.
We should also add that we actually also have another guide later, which is featuring Martin, who's the technical artist. And he's actually explaining how he's been doing content offering for the agent render pipeline.
Yeah. Very cool.
There's lots of thank yous.
Well, thank you right back from tuning in. And I mean, I hope that a lot of people have appetite to go and download it and play around with it and make some amazing stuff.
Yeah. Make all the rockets slightly bigger, which is the first thing I did.
Slower, heat seeking. I don't know. It's like the sky's the limit. I mean, we definitely, so as developers, we of course wanted to have a lot of ideas, but we also tried to make it in some ways a little bit dry maybe, but that's kind of on purpose because we wanted to make maybe things more clear. So it would be nice if someone else did all the cool stuff.
There is one last minute question.
Yes, good.
I don't know if it will take a last minute to answer it. So you mentioned using character arrays instead of strings in the server log to not generate garbage.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate on that? And if this approach is used in game UI text as well?
Oh, I like that question. So first, really quickly. So I'm just going to go down, as you say, the rabbit hole. That's a good way to think about this. So this is at garbage less right onto the overlay of the screen. And it works like this. If I go into write, there's a lot of template sort of like or generic magic here. But at the end of the day, I'm actually going into, it's like this. So this is basically, I'm working with like unsafe code and all kinds of char arrays. So I basically format it into a char array rather than into a string, and then I can do it without allocating stuff. And we kind of used one of the same patterns for, let's see if I can find that real quickly, UI. Oh, where's that? It is called UI extension methods. Yeah, there it is. So we do something similar for. Let me just show a better place and count down here. Okay, so this is a classic thing. I have a text, a UI, Unity Engine UI text. We all know that. And what you would normally do if you wanted to update a countdown, you would say level info counter.text equals string.format, and you know the rest, right? So this is what you would normally do. And then a little bit later, someone would come and scream at you and say, oh my God, you're generating garbage. So this generates garbage. So what we did is not a full solution, but it's better. We made this like extension method format, which is also using char arrays to do the actual formatting. And then it compares the char array against the string that we have already set in the UI, and only if they are changed do we update it. So basically, this will only generate garbage if the count is actually changing. It's just a little bit of quality of life for programmers that you can then, at least you have done it as good as you can, because you can't really update the UIs without generating sort of like garbage. So there's some tricks and stuff like that. Good. Are we up, or does I get a sign that maybe there's one more comment?
Maybe. I guess there's this.
I'll bring up.
I guess if people have more in-depth questions, definitely on the forums, Peter and a variety of other people in the team, and a variety of people not even in the team that at Unity in general are on there and can answer them. And I guess the benefit of that is then the answer will not just be in this video recording, 60 odd minutes in, but would be documented forever.
Absolutely.
On the forums as well, publicly. Yeah, I'm sure you could be here for another 5, 6, 7 hours talking about
We
this.
could definitely talk about this much more. There's a lot of depth to dive, or rabbit holes to jump into for sure.
And there's thanks for creating the example project as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks for checking out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for presenting today, guys. And we hope to see all of you in the forums.
Yes.
Cool.
Take care. Cheers.
Thank you.